that they have not played Buddy. They're still playing Emmett, and he keeps looking for the shots. He's confident. He has the lead. The score 23-14. The key to this game is really Buddy, pounding that ball on the serve, keeping it at the long line, and that gives Emmett the chance to be a superstar. But I fault the other team for not playing Buddy. I don't care how you do it. Back up, let the ball die. I don't care how you do it. You back up and you just make sure that ball goes over to Buddy. He can't hurt you. He keeps him out. He keeps Emmett out of the play. It makes him hungry, and the key would have been theirs. But Robert is totally at fault in not my judgment in this game. He hasn't the foggiest notion of what to do. Look at that, every ball back to Emmett. That's it, that was a fine lift. Look at this, back to Emmett again. What did you expect him to do? He rolled it out, 25-14, and a great match. We'll get Emmett and Buddy over here for a few seconds. I wanted to get on the wall there. Okay, yeah. Okay.
Beauty questions, okay?
You're so beautiful, no matter what you do, no matter where you are. Despite the fact that your friend lost, you're still a great champion. You always were. And what I want you to think about now is, what do you think the game plan of Robert Sostre and Billy were? Do you know for a fact whether or not they discussed before the game what they were going to do?
No.
I would say that the answer is no. What is your opinion about the fact that only once during the game Billy cheered Sostre on, and never throughout the game did Sostre cheer Billy on? What about that?
Robert's very quiet.
Okay. Don't you think he should have helped him out by cheering him on?
No.
Okay, here's the critical question, Erika. From what you observed, why were Robert Sostre and Billy playing Emmett singles rather than moving the ball at off speed to Buddy?
And they shouldn't have lowered the ball.
Exactly.
No, their kill shots weren't working.
Exactly. Now here's an important question for you. Having been the supermodel of the world winner and having traveled around the world, do you think that there's a trend for really young models to make it, say in the almost sub-teenage category? Or do you think that there'll be a trend back to beauties in your age bracket, namely the early 20s? What do you think, Erika?
I think they like young people because they're not rigid in their thinking, and that they're very pliable.
And is that because?
Whatever someone tells them to do.
And is that also because the perpetrators and the people who rule the strings of the modeling game and perhaps the movie industry, that they want young people because of the AIDS epidemic? What's your opinion of that?
I didn't think about the AIDS epidemic.
Because as I understand it, these people are now going for young people, and for that reason.
Like I said, they're willing to do things more open-mindedly than people my age who already know what's right for them or what's wrong for them.
But you could make those people do all that despite the fact that they may be older models.
Well, if you offer the people money, most people would do whatever you say.
So you don't think that they're tending toward younger people because they're afraid of AIDS?
They have more time in their career when they're younger. They have a good 10 years when they're 15 to 25, whereas I don't.
Yeah, but the point is, even if you get a young person, that the turnover is very great.
Let's talk about something important.
No, we're going to get to that.
All right.
The turnover is very great also. Now, having witnessed this game, which theoretically, if played correctly, is an art form, and you knowing many prominent people in the literary field, if Larry Rivers were here today and he would have viewed this game, what sort of an introductory sentence would he make to an article about what he observed? Knowing his psyche, yeah.
It would be abstract, because he's abstract. So I wouldn't be able to say, because I'm more of a romantic.
But try and think of one sentence that you imagine he would say.
Mind.
Okay, now you're familiar with Norman Mailer. If Norman Mailer would have seen this confrontation, he lives on your block, and he did a wonderful Life magazine article about the World Championship fight. and about the space shuttle, what would his sentence be about this game?
About this game?
What he just saw about that match. Would he see it as a primeval confrontation between troglodytes?
Yeah. A battle of pure spirit.
Right. Was there anything...
Not much thought involved.
Very good. There was very little creativity about it, about thinking. Was it tantamount to two heavyweight fighters going to the ring with no defensive skills and just punching each other out?
Fighters have a lot more planned,
even if they don't have a defense, basically.
Well, they have trainers to tell them what to do. I mean, these two people, they just go in and they hope for the best, you know?
Emmett! Oh, we just want to get it from one. Emmett!
Well, that was enjoyable.
Emmett!
Are you living in the Heights?
Yeah.
Just this, we got to continue. I'll be right with you. Stand there 1 second. Okay, just for 3 more seconds. They're using the middle already. We'll get off in a second. It's going to be 3 more minutes. Look, who you're seeing now, as Matthew Paris asked before, Emmett was the guy who thought about this tournament, who made it a tremendous success. And not only did he have his mind filled with the seeding and the games in progress and the rain delay, he went on to win the championship practically single-handedly, as I observed it. Now, he's going to close our program looking at Erika, our supermodel, and he's going to try and combine these two thoughts, winning all the money, winning the tournament, and also looking at this beautiful girl, Erika. We'll have your closing remark about what all this meant to you today.
Yeah, it's been a great turnout. I'd like to do this again. You know, too much pressure on them at the end.
Very good.
They choke. It just put too much pressure.
And you're a tremendous athlete, and we give you special congratulations for running this tournament. We're going to have an inner-city tournament during the months of July and August, and I know because you are so prominent in this game, you're going to play a bigger and bigger role in the world of handball as we go on, not only with cable, but also because of the smarts that you have and because of the great personality you have. And we thank you so much for running it here at West 5th Street. Thank you, Emmett. Just beautiful.
Okay, here we go.
This is Poet Circle. I'm Harry Ellison, Matthew Paris. Poetry of Barbara Weeks. Oh, very essential involvement. Integrity of essential involvement. Extremely metaphoric poet.
You know, I'm amazed that this country has produced so many women poets who have this certain kind of insular and chamber intensity and ferocity the way Barbara Weeks has. You know, if you read through any of the 19th century anthologies of poetry, one of the things that you see is there are a lot of women who wrote poetry. Apparently a lot of men didn't write that much poetry or didn't publish that much poetry. And there's a long-term tradition in this country of women writing lyric poems the way Barbara Weeks has. You think of Emily Dickinson, or on another level you think of Eleanor Wiley or Edna St. Vincent Millay in the 20th century. And there's this rather interesting tradition of women looking at their life in chamber terms. Very rarely do you have any large and extended metaphysical thoughts. When they come, as in either Emily Dickinson or Barbara Weeks, they come in a kind of a pithy epigrammatic statement, a kind of a moment of revelation rather than an extended idea, which seems to be a male idea more.
Well, there is certainly a certain intensity. I was thinking of a candle burning on both ends, and listening to Barbara Weeks' poetry, there is that intensity of that candle. It produces such a beautiful light while it's burning, but it might not burn very long. There is, though, the beauty of it, and the recognition of its beauty, and Barbara Weeks' metaphoric feelings that she finds the language for so well in her work, certainly does seem to burn. So there is an emanation. It fills my thoughts as I am able to enter into it. And I do have sometimes a confidence that I could stay with that flame. But there also is that ephemeral texture to her work. And then I feel that the flame seems to be flickering, and I am losing it. And
you know, how had you spent a lot of time around Barbara over the past 2 to 3 years since she got a lot better? Could you talk about that?
Well, I have had the opportunity to listen to Barbara's work over quite a period of time, and I've therefore heard a large body of Barbara Weeks' poetry. And Barbara Weeks, now as to the evolution of her work, well, she was very accomplished, mature, poetic voice when I first began to hear Barbara Weeks. And she has always been that for me. There has been a feeling for me when Barbara Weeks reads that here we have somebody who has something to say, and isn't apologetic about the time that it might take to say it. It's as though she is saying, I have something to say, and I want you to hear it, and this time is valuable. We can have our social conversations in the luncheonette, we can have a bowl of soup and we can talk, but now this is something special, and I want to say this.
I know from talking with Barbara off camera, she spends the entire day writing poetry. She's an absolutely dedicated poet. I mean, it's not something that she picks up on the way to the bathroom or something like that. And I think that really shows up in the kind of sculpted quality of her verse.
Oh, absolutely. There is that. There is the craft of it there. That is for sure. And there is the respect for poetry that comes through. That this is something that deserves respect and is to be treated with respect. It's almost, I would say, when I do allow myself to wander through the audience, as as I look through the audience, I find there is that respect for Barbara Weeks' poetry, that the respect that she feels for it seems to encourage, seems to enhance. It is something the audience recognizes, and I think in many instances places the audience in a certain disposition where they are receptive to something important being said.
Well, you know, she really gives you this great stuff. I mean, you know, a lot of poets will get up there and be, I don't want to mention names, be beautiful and young and sexually attractive and talk about their love affairs, and essentially they're sort of carnally inviting. And then there are the women that go up there and talk about their past and how they only wish that it had continued into the present. I think a woman who has reached a certain age where she's no longer enticing in the way that women of 20 are, with their beauty and their hope and their sense of perfection, has a very different thing to say than an ingenue in the poetry world.
It's very interesting that you mention people wishing their past could be a part of their present. For Barbara Weeks, her present becomes a part of my future, because inevitably, when I leave a poetry reading, I could take with me, in memory, Barbara Weeks' lines, and they become a part of my life.
Well, I think Barbara really concentrates on metaphor. There's not, the verse seems to be pretty free. I don't get a sense of a regular meter. There's almost no rhyme. And what we have left, I think, is an extension of metaphorical idea. The poem usually seems to concentrate on some initial idea and then go forward, almost like Blake moving forward through the lateral and resonant language of metaphor.
And nature metaphors, I often find nature metaphors. It is the junction where the reality meets its metaphoric counterpart in Barbara Weeks' poetry. That junction, which then establishes for me a connection between my own experiences, my own feelings and thoughts, and what Barbara Weeks is presented to me. Her work allows for this development within the mind of the listener or the reader of what might be a new creation. It is because of the great substance within her work. I'm so happy that I have this opportunity to talk about Barbara works in this type of a forum, because I have all of these things about her work that I do want to express. It is as though they have been building within me and now finding a certain order.
Well, that's eventually what happens to a lot of things. Now, there's something else about her work. There's a certain kind of focus on ideas and metaphors in Barbara's work. After she starts off, there isn't a capricious leap from idea to idea. There's really a very clear extension of the metaphor from the beginning of the poem onward. And I think in a way it's marvelous to see somebody think like a poet. I mean, when I hear Barbara's work or I look at it on the page, I see somebody thinking the way a poet thinks, which, as Baudelaire pointed out many times in the parallels and poems like that, is harmonically. There's always a lateral connection between things and other things. And I think part of the virtue of Barbara's poetry is this ability to think extendedly and well in a poetic way, in a resonant way. You know.
Well, what is that? What, you know, I hear people say, well, what is poetry? Then, well, it's rhythmical language. Well, sure, I do feel poetry. That's a requisite of it.
Ordinarily they say it's my feelings.
But
remember that? They've been saying it for 30 years.
Oh.
I express my feelings in poetry. That's what they say.
Oh, we sit with people in social settings and you think like a poet, you think like a poet. What do they mean? And then we find it in Barbara, and we find it in Barbara Weeks, and we say then, Barbara Weeks is that poet. She is a real poet. Well, perhaps we're all real poets. If we want to think of it as someone who finds the similarities between dissimilar things, as Barbara does, but she does more. She finds the language so that we could feel what she is expressing.
Yeah, well, you know, she's done everything she can to be a poet. I mean, outside of the talent, you got to have the industry, you got to have the work, you got to have the intellect, and she has the industry. Is of course the main thing, because the other things aren't going to go anywhere unless you work hard. She does it.
I'd like to return to what you were saying about her work, about the connections.
Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be a coming apart, a fragmentation of our ideas.
No.
They seem to carry forward an idea. There seems to be there for me a sense core, a pivotal sense core with a strong gravity that is holding the ideas. As Barbara moves from poem to poem in her readings, each poem has its own unity, and I have a feeling that if we were to transpose a line from one of the other poems into one of these poems,
Very hard to do.
it would stand out as not truly belonging there.
Right, extrusive, I agree.
It would not be caught up in that gravity. It would as though it would fly off in its own orbit.
I think so.
All held together perhaps by this pivotal sense core that exists within her poems.
Yeah. Well, I guess we're lucky to have her around, aren't we?
Oh, yes, she's been a very fine poet on the scene, and she has enriched it to a great extent, in my view.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Harry Ellison and Matthew Paris for Poet Circle. Okay. Who's on next one? Bertha.
Oh, crazy.
Go ahead.
You're going to wear the same thing?
Same shirt. Make sure you're on me. Yep.
This is Poet Circle. I'm Harry Ellison. This is Matthew Paris. This is poetry of Bertha Rogers, extremely mature, recognizable voice.
I'd say so mature she sounds as if she comes from an immortal strain. She's a kind of a druid, she's a kind of a iconic individual. She seems to have a lot of qualities about her that are attracted to things that are timeless, quote unquote, like trees, leaves, owls, land, sky. I don't think Bertha is in any danger of being dated because she doesn't live in history.
There is the feeling of timelessness about her work. Do you feel then, well, as I'm listening, I seem to be acquiring the feeling that you are saying her work stays in one spot? That doesn't seem...
Oh, no. Her work is about different things, but it's not about historical events. Like, I can't imagine her writing about Elvis, for example, or George Bush. I mean, it's unthinkable. In fact, I'd say the opposite about Bertha. Bertha, in fact, I think she gave up poetry. I think she told me for 19 years and only painted. She originally started as a poet, then moved into painting, and then almost 2 decades later went back into poetry. So her work is organic and growing and changing all the time. But its subject matter is usually about what she considers to be the timeless things. You know, in the sense of a lot of Shakespeare's subject matter, not all, but some of it is about family matters or life and death or character, or, you know, all kinds of comments on things that stand apart from his time. And at the same time, you can see Shakespeare was very involved in the politics of the time. You get no sense of the second side from Bertha's poetry. She's only involved in the timeless things.
Yes, there is a feeling of timeless things, and there are a large number of nature metaphors. And Bertha's knowledge of nature law is, I think, to be admired. There is, though, something else. There is that that essence which is poetry. You know, if you look at Bertha's work, look at one of Bertha's metaphoric poems concerning nature law. And if you were to ask, well, what is that poem about? Somebody were to tell you this in prose. And we have then a paraphrase of what that poem is about. That part that we could take out and put into a prose paraphrase, that would be removing the part that is not at the essence of the poem, perhaps. It is what is left there for me that I can't tell you about. Well, that is if I could tell you everything about Bertha's poem, then why write a poem about it at all? And that seems to be, in certain instances, that seems to be what one has a feeling they could do. But not with Bertha's work, not for me. For me, there is a great deal left that I have an intuitive feeling about, the strong, it's real. I can't tell you about it. That's the poem.
Well, if it isn't there and you
Yes.
told me about it, I'd be astonished.
If it isn't, if I can't tell you about it.
And it isn't there, I'd be astonished to hear it.
No, I didn't say it isn't there.
It is there, but you can't find it.
I can't find the language because it's as though we're talking.
You know what I think it is with Bertha? There's a celebration of the religion of the earth. I mean, if I were like to sum up ideas in Bertha's poetry, it would be somehow a celebration of nature as a kind of a motile, circular system of mechanics where things come and go. I mean, I would hate to do this to Bertha, but I mean, I think to try to translate any poem into prose is treason. But there certainly is a connection, an embrace with the cyclical changes of the world and the diversity of the world, the amazing number of things that go on in the world. I know Bertha has told me that she's averaged sometimes 17 drafts of a poem. And for poems that seem, pretty transparent, they aren't imploded language or anything like that, it shows that she is really looking to perfect a certain easy and deceptively casual transparency in her work, and she has to struggle to get it. I mean, it's not as if she goes out and writes these poems and that's it.
Well, there is a level of understanding which is quite accessible, but there are also these other levels, as I feel about Bertha Rogers' work, which have a very cogent feeling about them. I have the feeling that they are there and that I am understanding them. Perhaps perhaps you might say, as I understand them, I at the same moment move beyond them into another space. And would you talk about Bertha going through many revisions of her work? Perhaps it is of that nature. Perhaps as Bertha Rogers works, she moves beyond to another space, and so there is a certain instability about these poetic insights that I find that does not allow me to fully grasp them, to have a confidence, to be comfortable that I fully understand this idea. It has too much of a vibrancy to it, perhaps. It moves me beyond. Well, I could clearly feel that Bertha Rogers would write a poem and then return to it after a period of gestation, perhaps a couple of hours. And then only a couple of hours might do it, maybe even less than that. And then find that this is not saying what she now feels about the work, because it has this instability and allows for this continuous formulation of it, I guess you might say, as she is writing.
I don't know what she goes through in her revisions. I've never seen a whole series, but I have no idea.
Well, it seems almost as though it might be this process that I experience as I am listening to her work or reading it.
It sounds more like you.
Well, I certainly, there is a feeling of instability. I am quite confident at times that although I feel this poem now can be read or can be published, tomorrow morning when I wake up, I will find that revisions are needed.
Well, maybe that's why she does 17 revisions. I don't know.
Until you come to a point where it has become stable, and then I have the confidence, and perhaps Bertha's experiences of that nature.
I don't know. My experience is I do one revision, usually, maybe two. If I do more than two revisions, it means either the poem is no good, and I'm struggling with the fact that I haven't got a good poem here, and I'm trying to make it good, and I can't do it, out of just craft. Or the other possibility is my ideas are confused in the first place, and I haven't set about executing the thing properly, so I've made errors. And I have to rethink the whole thing. And I consider myself a person who struggles with language. Everybody does who's any good. And yet 17 revisions seems like a lot of revisions.
Well, it's an interesting point. Where are the revisions made? I think perhaps for one poet, there might be 20 revisions before the pen ever reaches the paper. For the other poet, maybe only 3. These revisions need not be made on a sheet of paper, of course. They can be made before the pen ever reaches the paper.
Yeah.
And it does seem to me that a great many editorial decisions, perhaps, are being made by Bertha Rogers before she ever begins to write the poem.